Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I am on with Ali Rowan. We're going to be talking about Ammon Hillman, the YouTuber that has a PhD in the classics, who talks about all these interesting ideas about Jesus and pederasty in the ancient world. And Ali has studied a lot on this topic, and she knows a lot about the inner workings of Ammon Hillman's group, and she was even a part of it in some way in the past. And she's here to just tell us what is true, what is false about some of the arguments Ammon has made. Of course, this is not a personal attack on Ammon, but it is a question of what is historically accurate. And if he wants to respond, I would be more than happy to hear it. And we'll even take this video down if he can prove the argument's wrong, right? So how are we doing today, Ali?
We're doing well. Yeah, looking forward to getting into this.
Awesome.
The first half will be, to some extent, having to put some background in on Ammon. So as such, there is that side before we then get into the, looking at what he presents in the first part that I will be doing and how that affects how he goes into his exegesis, or is it eisegesis, of the biblical texts.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the first thing to start here. Yeah. So Ali has. I mean, would you even say you've watched every video he has?
Yeah. I've missed out the last couple because I've been preparing for interviews. But
darn.
no, I've missed my full marks there. But no, I was involved with Ammon before the video YouTube started in 23. And basically his entheogenic drug use intersected with my own research. So I reached out. To begin with, we were sort of on a par talking about our research, like, colleagues almost. And then he invited me to join in when they started his Lady Babylon YouTube shows in January 23. But I'd already started picking up, you're not very faithful to the texts here. You seem to be pushing something in there that shouldn't be, rather than actually letting the text speak for themselves. So I was academically a little bit alarmed with what he was doing. But I'd also had prior experience in a small church fellowship that had been led by a narcissistic pastor, and the type of group dynamics that he had set up. And it just felt exactly the same where I was. And there was certainly an echo chamber operating, and any questions I was beginning to ask to try and get them to think beyond the narrative that's been given to them, it wasn't getting engaged with. And I thought, this isn't healthy. So it became, I had twice I asked to speak with him. Nothing came of it until eventually really my presence wasn't wanted any longer. And that happened in, March of 23. Fairly soon after that, they started a private Discord, which was invitation only. And of course, I didn't get an invitation. I didn't want to be in it anyway. But as such, things started happening there, which I didn't know about. But I was also evicted from the public Myth and Law Discord where it had all started. So I lost touch with them there as well. But I watched the videos, and several other people that had realized this isn't healthy, they also left. And, we had a small group that were trying to work out what was going on. What was his agenda? Where was he going with this? So we've been watching for quite a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. And what really interested me to begin with this discussion is what we'll talk about first is, so it's one thing to look at scholarship and the people that are watching, most of them don't have any formal education background. Most people aren't that familiar with ancient texts. You might read about it online or something like that, but you're not being taught by the experts, how to read the ancient text, from a like an actual method. Like this is what we get at by what the author is trying to say here, not just incorporating our thoughts and how actual historians work, right? And there's another aspect though, which is if you're not an expert, then it can be difficult to know what you're missing sometimes. Now, not that Ammon is, lying necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't say that he was lying in most, if not all instances. At the same time, there are ways where I'm just like, it seems like you're leaving out really important key details there. And, I might want to ask him that, but, I don't have the ability to talk to him on that, right? But what was really fascinating for me is in this discussion is that we actually have court documents of things that happened in the past, and it does seem like he actually has lied in the past on a few different notes. So I wanted to talk about that, Ali. Could you talk about like the what's happened with the court and why that's important for this discussion?
All right. Before we kick off into this,
Okay.
most of the interviews that he ever does with other hosts, and when he has talked about his past on his own shows, a lot of the time he centers on an instance where he was an adjunct professor working at St. Mary's University from the year 2014 to 15. It was only a one-year contract, and he was told at the end of 14 that it would not be renewed. He took on a janitor's job, but the theatre department hired him to translate the Seneca's play from Latin into English, and to as such advise in the artistic production of the play so that it could be authentic. It meant he would take classes with the students and taught them very, very inspiringly. He absolutely loves the classics. He really is an inspiring teacher. He catches enthusiasm. Anyway, part of the production, to make it authentic, apparently the actors would come in and curse the audience for their greed, for their vices, and they'd be waving these fascinas, which are phallus-shaped props. And it was frowned on that they were looking a bit obscene, so there was a bit of a hoo-ha. And they had to change them and had these sort of, he said they looked like bananas instead. Later, he was told he was under investigation. And at the time, he then went to the press and put forward this sort of sob story about, I'm being persecuted for producing things that was offensive to the administration, and that their sponsors were going to, take their money from them because, I offended them with this prop. So he had that tale to tell, but although there were other reasons that he was being investigated, that's not the story. But that's not the story he tells. One of the stories that he does tell, which is one of the investigations, which is sort of quite, gives him a bit of an aura, is that he was being investigated by the Catholic Church for demon possession after some parents had complained from hearing what the girls were saying, that he had taken them through this initiation, and he was talking about opening portals and the transdimensional things, apomania and abacic mania, and all of the stuff that he teaches us now, I could very much imagine was also what he was teaching then. And some parents misconstrued it all and thought, oh, he's demon possessed. And the Catholic Church came in and tried to find some sort of reason for it, but they found no evidence. So that shuts that down. But the real reason we will find out with the court documents. Later, I hadn't finished. When he was at the end of that term, he was told that he was not going to be employed anymore by the university, and he was dismissed. And this was then taken up by Hillman 2 years later as a complaint against the university for unfair dismissal and professional defamation, because he'd not been able to get another teaching job since then. So he was up in arms about, you've slurred my name, and that's what he was trying to push with these court documents. This is what the court is about. It was him complaining and suing the university and the university defending themselves. So that's the background to it. So I can get going. All right. So, and I will say it here, Hillman brought a defamation suit against St. Mary's University for unfair dismissal and professional defamation. Now shown here is the summary and the conclusion of the hearing, which failed to uphold his claim since it failed in all 5 categories under which a claim could be successful. The primary reason for his dismissal is the truth, that he did sexually harass several students and broke their code of professional standards of conduct. And I suppose I can read it out as well. Regardless of the existence of a privilege to protect comments made in response to media inquiries, truth is a complete defense to a defamation claim. Despite his protestations to the contrary and his incessant attempt to shift the reason for his termination to free speech over play props, Hillman did sexually harass students and commit misconduct. Hillman admitted in writing that he stalked a St. Mary's student, scaring her. Hillman admitted in writing and during an investigative interview that he twice went to a student's dorm room. Hillman sent emails to a St. Mary's student asking about sexual lingerie. There is simply no credible basis for Hillman to now claim that he did not commit misconduct and did not sexually harass students. Therefore, truth is a complete defense to Hillman's claims against St. Mary's. And the conclusion is that Hillman brought defamation claims for statements made more than 2 years before he commenced suit, for statements of opinion rather than fact, for statements protected by investigative privilege, and for the true statements. Thus, his claims are time-barred or insufficient as a matter of law. Ultimately, Hillman was terminated because he sexually harassed students at St. Mary's, and the truth of his harassment precludes his defamation claims. St. Mary's and Sharon, he was the dean, asked for summary judgment. So that is the truth. He was dismissed, frankly, for being sexually inappropriate with some of the students and making an unsafe and insecure, hostile learning environment for them. All right. Now, do you want to move on to the next slide, please? But this is what he did during the time when he was still employed, and he went to the media. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read what is highlighted here. Hillman says he was the subject of vague sexual harassment claims, which he denies, but that the university was looking for any excuse to get rid of him after he ruffled administrative feathers by introducing phallic props into a play. So this is his story. And then later on, Hillman said he suspects that the administration in his case were probably more concerned about offending donors than the play's content in relation to the university mission. In that sense, he said, there are parallels between Medea's mediations on greed and his own situation. And that in itself is ironic, he said, because the popularity of his courses, some of which were oversubscribed, were helping the university. With my firing, he shot a message across the bow. Look how they've, I'm not sure what that says under there. Look how they've, you've lost it. Come back. It's all right. I'll just have to ad-lib.
I'll read it. Look, this is what happens to people who stand up and insist upon speaking freely, he said. It's not academic at all.
And to some extent, that is a very defamatory statement to make in a magazine. This is Inside Higher Education, slandering a university for being offended by phallic props and it being a matter of free speech. I think, if anything, they should be bringing a defamation claim against him. So that is one story that he likes to propagate, that he was fired because of that. And there's another story that he also likes to propagate, which should be in the next slide. You can play that one.
where I was sitting at a conference table in a downtown building in Minneapolis with an attorney standing over me, yelling at me, "Are you the god Pan?" He just kept repeating it over and over again. I was looking at my attorney, looking at him. Is this crazy? Is it happening? Objection, objections, objections. Oh, I had 8 hours of a grilling that implied that I was a Satanist and a worker of magic and an opener of portals. And no, you know what I am? I'm a reader of sources. That's what I am. And this stuff is disturbing.
Yes.
It's disturbing, but it's there.
So what do you think about that?
Well, it's true. The deposition did take 8 hours, but the actual questioning about the god Pan, if you want to put the next slide up, this is the total. You can see the highlighted one. That's the number of times Pan is mentioned in a short exchange that perhaps took a minute. And he has strung this whole, well, it's just untrue. He's creating a persona. He's creating an aura about himself, which is just not true from the facts. So there is very, very little of what he's saying publicly about himself that can be tied to the factual statements that are here in the court documents. We will put a link to them. You can read them all yourself. They make a very interesting read, and they don't say the same story that Ammon Hillman is saying of himself. Can you go on to the next slide?
I just wanted to briefly mention, okay, so in his emails with other people, he says things like, okay, Pan says this, or like he's acting like he's Pan, and you can read it here. From an attorney perspective, it's like, yeah, like if I don't know anything about Ammon, of course I'm going to ask about this, because this is just like, what is going on? So at the same time, this isn't what, definitely, as you said, wasn't some 8-hour thing where he's like, the attorney's like, oh yeah, you know, you're a Satan worshiper who's absolutely crazy. Like, yep, they probably did want to make him look like he was crazy, and this might have done a good job. I don't know. But at the same time, it is odd. So like, why wouldn't they ask about it if they are, you know, an attorney that is trying to defend defamation, right? There was more on that though. Oh yeah, like they tried to make him look like a Satanist or something like that, or that he opened portals. But
well, none of this is in the deposition. He's conflating the Catholic Church's small investigation, which is not in this deposition, and the Catholic Church did a separate investigation, which was included in that conclusion. It says statements of opinion. That is all that this conclusion of the whole court case will say, that the evidence was not there for him to be positively identified as working in anything satanic, which is what the Catholic Church's investigation found. Mm-hmm. It was just hearsay, and it was there was no substance to it.
Yeah, well, I just found it really interesting why he would say this, because that they tried to make him look like he was opening portals, but they themselves, the college, said that no, he wasn't opening portals. That was just something the parents said.
That's
so
right.
It doesn't make any sense for the prosecutor, defendant, attorney, whatever. It doesn't make any sense for them to say that. And if you look through all the documents, there's no part where it says it. There's one part where they explicitly say he did not do it because of it. That was just the parents saying it. So I was just like, what is he talking about?
Yeah, it makes him sound important, really. That he's being singled out as some great worker of occult powers. But he's not. Okay.
Yeah.
So right.
One other thing on there is that, okay, maybe his memory, he forgot about it, or like it was a really difficult 8 hours. Maybe he forgot some stuff. He's blending stuff together. That's fine, okay? But at the same time, I don't know. I think it's really interesting that he in multiple instances, as we'll show, that he's like greatly misrepresenting like why he was fired, what happened with the history behind it, this court case. But yes, what's next here? So this is claiming of being an incubus at St. Mary's University.
Getting into the text that had to do with the use of an incubus, and I'll just say this: there was a moment when I questioned my scientific, capabilities, because I had entered into an act that was sensed and perceived and reported by a person that the report could only be miraculous, right? It's the hovering and doing the incubus thing. When I was reading about the incubus, I was scientifically dissecting how this was being done, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it and see what happens. I'm just telling you scientifically. And then the very next day, it was reported exactly what I ended up, projecting. There's no belief involved. Somebody called me and said, this is what's going on. And the person that it happened to was ejected from the university for problems with mental stability. So I can tell you for a fact the physics behind what, people say, oh, he's demon possessed. There's a reason they wanted to investigate me for demon possession, right? Because there were things that I could reportedly do that people, it was causing, when it got to the courts, because I came after the university, because you can't fire somebody for translating Seneca. I'm sorry. You can't do that. So when I went after the courts, it became an issue with the attorneys involved to what extent I was operating a cult, right? That became the question. To what point people believe that you are able to translocate and a form that is vampiric, right? And that was the fervor that was on campus. And that fervor perfectly and beautifully matched everything that the muse had told me. Everything in all of these passages. People say, is the muse, are you talking about a muse that's an idea or an ideal? No, I'm talking about an actual muse. I'm talking about opening up a text and being told exactly how to perform certain things, do certain things, and how to work, right? That's the power of the Logos. And when, for example, I tell this one, and I want people to realize this because I tell everybody, people say, you're a genius. You figured something out. It's incredible. You're a genius. Oh, it's very, no, I'm not a genius. I'm a total cheat. I have a muse. You can't see her, but she's standing next to me. And if I ask her, show me X, Y, or Z, she'll do it. And I asked her, show me how to do this. And I projected in the very next day reports of it. And I realized right away, oh, okay, there's some real significant God stuff going on here, right? When Archilochus stands up and he says, I'm a servant of the God of war and the muses, right? And the beauty of the muses, right? He's not saying that because he's coming up with an abstract idea. People need to understand the muse is not an abstraction. And people say, oh, it's just somebody's inspiration. No, it is not. They didn't talk about that. It's not how they approached it. They approached it as an actual entity, right? The Holy Spirit is the classical muse, right? Christians today walk around praying and working in the Holy Spirit. They understand what that means. There is a reality to it. And that's why some people can sense that reality and will say, oh, he's demon possessed.
All right, so that was a lot there. So it seemed like he was saying or admitting to trying to portray himself, at least that he did some type of incubus with the girl at the college. Is that what that was about?
Yeah, the story goes round that somebody, woke in the night and saw him floating through the door and hovering over a girl and stretching forth his hand, and she froze, and that's the story that's gone around. I don't think anybody testified to it. I don't know where the story originated, but that's what the story is. It's not in the deposition, and the investigation by the Catholic Church was never released, unfortunately. So it's all hearsay. Something happened. Students got freaked. They said something to their parents, and they called an investigation. That's really all the facts that we can say. All right, but it becomes a huge plus for Hillman's sort of alter ego, almost, to have a reputation like that. So he does emphasize that reputation.
So why is that important? Does that contradict with some other things?
It's part of producing a persona, I believe. Nobody really knows who the real Hillman is. He has plenty of talent. He's an amazing teacher. I was in Greek lessons with him. His love of the language is absolutely infectious, and of the culture. But there is something else at play where he wants to have almost like a revenge on the Christian church because of child sex abuse going through the ages, but also with the fascination of the ancient cultic mystery rites that he's read in these texts. And he's seen the possibility that from the Eleusinian mysteries, the death and resurrection rituals that they did there, that was drug-induced. And he's now seeing that in the scene where Jesus was arrested with the boy. And that one, I call it a boy because he said it so often. It's not. He's a young man. So the young man that is actually dressed in this white cloth, which then came off him when he ran away. So he was not naked when he was with Jesus. He was clothed or wrapped in a white cloth, which is quite likely after a baptism. There's a mikveh underneath the cave, which is Gethsemane. There's an oil press. Gethsemane means place of the oil press. And there's an oil processing plant in this cave on the sides of the Mount of Olives. And I think it was a perfectly innocent scene. He just baptized and initiated this young man. And in John 18:6, I think it says, he came forth. It's an exergo. He came out from. And to me, that sounds like he's coming out from the cave. And then said, why have you come? So there's lots of very innocent reasons why that scene is there. But he's chosen to make that scene the central hub to imagine all sorts of cultic activity going on, which he has read in previous texts. And also with the semen communion that's mentioned in Epiphanius's Panarion. Hippolytus mentions the Perotai doing it. It is in the texts, and he's drawn it all together and seen it all happening with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. So to have ideas that are sort of supernatural and cultic, it feeds very well into him also being somebody that is working magic, that is in tune with the cultic, which is all about going from this into the unseen realm, which all the occult powers are aiming to do. So it helps the flow of the narrative and his what he's presenting to actually have this persona that he's a worker of occult.
Yeah, and the whole young boy or son or kid or whatever man, I have a whole 2-hour video on that topic if you want to check in the description, where I quote from a number of different scholars and possibly talk about things that maybe should have been mentioned that Ammon coincidentally did not. But yeah, any thoughts?
Okay, we'll move on, I think.
Okay.
That's the closest I ever got to the reality, was taking those students through those rites. That's it. You're right there in it. Isn't that what acting is for? They weren't supposed to get paid, right? This is the religion, bringing the God via possession. And there's some kind of serious power there, because just by the act of us doing that, the entire community around us erupted between two groups of people, those who watched it and loved it, and those who thought it was the end of the world coming up.
All right. Now here, did you notice that he was denying that he was running a cult? But when you take the students through the initiation, that's what you're doing. You're initiating them into the cult. So to some extent, what he's now been doing in the Myth and Law Discord and the Lady Babylon, I think it was a dry run as well with the girls there. So that he would have been talking about portals and opening stuff and going through and into ionic life, all the stuff that he talks now. So I can imagine the parents would be alarmed and call in for the church to have an investigation. And when he says about the splitting of the two groups, he calls that a purging, where in the Bacchic mania, it makes people react in a way that's either positive or negative. And those who react negatively, he usually labels as people that are motivated by greed, and they don't want to have anything to do with it, and he doesn't want anything to do with them. Now, I didn't warm to him, not because I was offended, but because I couldn't see where his exegesis was coming from. It was just an academic disagreement, and it wasn't being addressed. But it wasn't that, oh dear, this is so shocking, I don't like what you're doing and I'm against this. There was nothing of that sort. So his purging of me, which he boasted about when he kicked me out of the Greek class, was for different reasons. It's basically, I wasn't going to join the echo chamber. But this idea of purging does come up quite often in what he does.
By the way, you have dirty, rotten sex demons in you. You do. You do. Everybody out there, I know you do. There's not a person that I'm pointing at who doesn't have sex demons. Yeah. Yeah. How do you know? You have to meld, man. It takes a mind, and you reach out, you become that incubus, and then all of a sudden you're like, dude, this lady's a pervert, right? You see all those hidden demons. It's wonderful to bring out people's hidden demons. You ever see that? Sometimes they'll cast them forward for you, right? Right? People are like, oh, he's a this or that. It's usually the this or that they really want. You know what I mean? Don't tell me I'm a cult leader, right? Just because you want me to be your cult leader, don't tell me I'm a cult leader.
Well, he said it. And, he does try and deny that he's running a cult, but I think it's fairly obvious that there's that attraction around him. But it's not just the like the mystery cult. There's also a relationship cult going on as well. But anyway, carry on. We'll talk about the next thing. In early February, January, end of January, February, they started, this is in 23. I haven't got the slide here, which I'll have to name the person. Snappy is a person who has a very interesting YouTube account of her own, and they are, sort of like a sister show supporting Ammon. And they have a Discord, and a tab was open for them to meet and call the Ordo Serpentis Rosi. And it was, as such, people were being called into and invited into it. I was invited into it. But you had to go through an initiation. And that was to either have your head completely shaved or to take a one-night stand. And being almost 40 years married and nearly 63 at the time, wasn't for me. So no, thank you. But in the activities that he was asking them as a more sort of intimate group together after the shows, now this would be the early hours for me, I'm in the UK, so you're looking at 3 or 4 in the morning at that point, so no way for me. And they would sometimes be asked to assist. Now, this is a particular one that a friend of mine who, when I was removed from participation, several people with their knowledge of cult control also smelt it, and they came off, they left as well. But one of these people that is now my friend, he was involved with an after show session, and this is an example. He said, well, originally he'd posted it on a Discord that we were using. Another friend that had been evicted, he opened up his Discord for us to use. So we've had a space just to try and discuss and work out what was happening. So my friend said, I removed the incriminating post that I added earlier from Ammon's private email with me after our group discussion. I would like to add it back so that everyone here has a clearer picture of the type of things he was asking us to do in the inner order. Now, this was after a particularly vicious discussion about attacking a specific person and his wife. Ammon proposed to use the energy of us masturbating to send a dream incubus into the Pastor Douglas Wilson's sleep to rape him. Charming. All right. And I'll have to expand that. No, I can't. Watch this space.
Maybe go off while you do. Seriously, hiding off. And remember this. This guy believes 12-year-olds should have to legally marry this and F anyone who can't support the virgin, from Ammon.
Yeah. And he'd encouraged everybody to take whatever drug they like to use and concentrate on the picture here that somebody posted up there of Doug Wilson and his wife. And I think the particular vehemence he had is because of a very strict patriarchal teaching that Doug Wilson has, which is why he mentioned about if you've been raped, you still got to marry your rapist. I don't know if he does teach that, but that's what Ammon was saying, to stir up the hatred so that they had that energy when they were sort of helping him. So that's the sort of thing. All right. Now, it is not just I did mention this before. It is not just the occulty type things that make something a cult. You can have cult control dynamics in relationships happening in the workplace, happening in politics, happening in kosher churches. All right. And it is these particular dynamics here that are just set up. And I know that they're all happening in with Ammon's group. He has nobody that he gives account to. And as such, that makes him a tyrant. He has no other accountability. He's the sole authority within the group. And there's a hierarchical structure, of course, and there's circles of loyalty. Those who will trust anything he says and do anything he does. And they almost vie for showing the loyalty. Now, we had that in the church, the abusive church that I was in. There's one of 2 or 3 very devoted single ladies that just loved vying for the most attention they could get from the pastor. And they did their best to make everything happen and happen smoothly. They were enablers for this pastor. And the rest of everybody else just had to reflect back to the pastor what he was giving to them, amening him and just being in agreement, which again we see in Ammon's cult. But he also had an image. This person decided he was, like Moses going up the mountain to get God's word for us. Ammon has his muse that instructs him. But also with the image that is created, you have to protect it. And he was very good at silencing voices that criticized. And they were the ripples in the pond, disturbing this beautiful reflection coming back. And you have to smooth the pond over again by removing the disturbance. For us in our church, it was a very painful exit. With Ammon, it's a bit quicker. Get out my dojo, leave immediately. So, I had that. But afterwards, which I didn't understand at the time, but he used the expression to the group, forgive me for or apologies for the purge, he called it. All right. And this is what he means. People that will not accept him have to be purged. And then he said, I have no boss. I can do whatever I want, which should put a huge red flag for anybody. And he could do whatever he wanted because there was nobody to give account to. And the aftermath for us in our church was shunning, silence. We try to reach out, but we'd been isolated off from them and slandered enough for them to be suspicious and not want to reach out. And I found exactly the same has happened in Ammon's cult as well. There's been a lot going on, really, but I've continued just when I can to post factual information in his YouTube to counter whatever it was that I picked up. It just wasn't factual that he was saying. And he hides them. You can do a moderator review and they disappear for public view, but I can still see them. A Reddit post started as well. I could take clips and I could analyze them and just use them for my own use, but I put some together in a document and I posted that in Reddit, and it created a fair bit of response. And within a few weeks, suddenly all of my clips had become unavailable. He blocked me. So everything that I'd taken with my Ali Rowan account, my YouTube account, is now defunct for anybody else to use. So, he's taking measures to make sure that my voice is quieted. What is he hiding? That's the question. Why doesn't he let me speak? I'm not slandering him. I'm just putting down the facts from the text or from the lexica, or when I've chased up the real sources, they don't agree with what he's saying. And I will explain it and put it very clearly in a comment, and it gets hidden. I wonder what he's hiding. All right. And a lot of the reason why he's arriving at what he does, he will use a certain methodology. And it's not a methodology that really should be used because it won't produce a valid translation. And if you take the analogy of football, you've got 11 team members. I'm talking about English football here. I don't know much about your American football, except that you pick the ball up and you barge into each other. That's about all I can tell. And that it's a bit like rugby, and you run up the other end and put it down. So it's a very different game. All right. So if you're going to play English football, there are certain rules. And if you then get through the goalposts, you have to have followed those rules before you can score a goal. And if you've broken those rules, you'll be stopped. All right. And anything that you try and get through to that goal is disallowed. So at the moment, a good methodology, you're looking at hermeneutics that you have to understand the language, the philology, but also very critically the context of the words. Ammon has a habit of showing the text in Greek and translating it for you. So you've got to trust that he's translating it correctly. I've picked up enough Greek to follow some of the words, but there's so much vocabulary that it's just unknown to me. But he will then pick up a word and say, right, let's look at the Little Scott Jones lexicon, LSJ, and which is online, and you can easily cut and paste and put it up on screen as well. And it'll have a list of all sorts of connotations that this word can take.
Mhm.
And he'll usually skip down the list until he finds one that suits what he'd like it to say. It's usually got a cultish or a drug or some sort of mystery or sexual or, some other reason that it's attractive. So he will take that connotation and tell you that's what it means. But it's not what it should mean in the context. And we've got some illustration here. If you'd like to do the next few slides, please. Not that one. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Go back.
All right. No, we'll go back. We'll go back. We'll go back to Ammon's. There we go. We have... No, I've gone on too far. Can you go back to where we were, please? Sorry.
That's okay.
So having gone context, you also have to look at semantics, where a word can take on a meaning within a certain field of meanings. But sometimes that field of meanings becomes defunct for that word, and the word will then be used in another field. All right. And when classical Greek morphed into Koine Greek after the death of Alexander the Great, a lot of the classical words lost their meaning that they were understood with in the classical time, and they took on a new meaning in Koine Greek. Their semantics changed, and this is something that Ammon very often does not pay much attention to, and he will still try and use the classical meanings in the Koine texts. Now, every single Bible text is Koine, but he was trying to use classical connotations in the Koine, and they don't work. Well, they shouldn't work. And there's a particular word that I will talk about later, which is very critical why it should not be taken with its classical meaning, but we'll get on to that one. Obviously, you need your lexicology, form criticism. Here you're looking at, is it a poem? Is it history? Is it a visionary material? And it makes a big difference to how to interpret and therefore how to translate. You can use coded words in a vision, because usually a vision means that this thing that it says isn't what it means, and you can use a code for that. But you don't do that for a historical account, which the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts. They're not poetry with visions, So if the word says what it does, then you shouldn't be trying to import some mystical meaning into just an ordinary sentence about an event that happened. All right, but this is something that Ammon does. And he pays no attention at all to redactions, which means that you've had a text which has then been edited or added to in later times. And it, without doubt, all synoptic gospel problem solving has to take account of all the different changes that have happened. And most of the texts that, this has gone to textual criticism, you can see that some of the texts have had later editions. Early editions don't have them. Sections later are added. All right. So what we've ended up as an end result in the Bible is been a very long process of lots of human interference and additions and changes. But with Ammon, any text ends up being a valid text. It doesn't matter if it's something that was added in the 3rd century. Somehow it did belong to Jesus, and he said it. He doesn't do any criticism, any textual criticism, any form criticism of the text that he's using. If it's a text, it's true and it belongs to Jesus. And even if it's a paraphrase written in the 5th century about Jesus, it's the true thing that happened. It's bananas what he does, but he says it so convincingly, and his people aren't critical thinkers. They're emotionally involved. He's a very good, amazing stagecraft, he's quite mesmeric when he talks, and he does it in a sort of cryptic way, and you're sort of tied in there trying to understand what he's saying, and he's drawing you through. And with his mesmeric repetitions of certain things, it just sinks in. And I find it still very difficult to talk about the young man at Gethsemane. It comes up immediately as the boy, because he said it so often. So, that's one part of it. And the history and the culture. He's tried to say that really nothing is Semitic. It's all Greek. It was all Hellenized, Jews, and they were Greek culture, and they did Greek mysteries. No, they were Jews trying to uphold Yahweh's traditions and have a temple worship and follow the law of Yahweh. But he will ignore that. And there's a whole big argument about whether the Greek Septuagint was the original and that the Hebrew was translated from it. Mm-hmm. Any sensible scholar knows it's the other way around. I'll talk about more of that later. And then whatever that last one was, if you bob it back up again, history and culture. Oh yeah, the archaeology can help you. And also, more importantly, what is the intent of the author when he wrote these words? Not what. It's all right doing it as a literary exercise to completely rework and reimagine a piece of writing. But if you're going to try and claim that this is the reality that the author was talking about, you have to hear what the author himself was saying, which means you've got to have his context and think, how is he communicating to his audience in his time, in their situation? Did this author use this word in another passage to help you understand what he means in this passage? The author uses a certain vocabulary and a certain language in a certain way consistently within his own work. And you can't import something that's completely out of character to say that in this one verse here, this word that means something else there now means something completely different here. An author wouldn't do that. So there's so many other considerations that need to be kept in mind when he's going through his eisegesis, I'm going to call it, because it really is an exegesis. So do you want to move on to the next slide? Now, Team Eisegesis, led by Captain Hillman, yes, he's a magnificent philologist. He has a grasp of the Greek language. It's incredible. Full marks. Sorry about that. He's certainly very, very adept with his Greek. But another major part of his methodology is to use his muse. Now, we've heard a bit about his muse already, who's supposed to speak to him from the text that he's reading and show him all the connections between very obscure medical texts that he's read, written by Galen, Dioscordes, quite a few other authors, as well as ancient cultic texts that he's read. And he says that because nobody has read all of this, they can't read and understand the New Testament. Well, that's not true, because all of that extra reading that he's done only gives him fodder, ammunition, whatever, to then put into the text. It is not what the text is saying that comes out of it. And having all this extra knowledge is actually only complicating the matters, and it's irrelevant. Because the intention of the author is to talk about what is happening in his time, and it's he might want to say that it's all about ancient mysteries that was happening, and he will create a context which makes what he says seem true, but he's created that context for it to seem true. It's very circular. So everything is Greek. The LXX has to be Greek, obviously, but it means all of the New Testament and all the Old Testament, can then have the same treatment, where he uses the LSJ to take a text byte, and he will take it to the, and look for the right cultic meaning, which he'll then import back in again. Whoops, what's happened there? Pop down. And he finds that virtually any ancient text relates to this ancient Bronze Age mystery in the Bible. He's redone Joseph, he's redone Adam and Eve, he's redone Abraham and Isaac, Tobit, Daniel, several characters he's honed in on and found some things that if you import the right words into the text, you can make them sound cultish. But again, he's importing words in. They aren't there. And part of his methodology is to repeat and give you graphic images, lots of them, to establish in your mind what he's saying is true. As part of his methodology, it's in his presentation. And he uses Teddy Bass's music, which is sort of like a rap. Again, a repetition. There's that sort of rhythm to it. It sort of helps go into your brain. It is brainwashing. And another method that he uses is to just claim that he's being an honest, pure motived scholar that just brings them the sources. And you can trust me. I have no agenda. I'm not trying to make money out of you. I'm not monetized. I'm not here to fleece you, or I'm not grifting. It's a bit of a straw man, really, because we're having to trust him to translate these texts to us, but it's more of an interpretation of the text to us. It doesn't mean it's an honest translation. I know he's owned the words and he'll find connotations from the LSJ to put in there, but it may not actually have been what the author intended. And when scholars do make some comeback, I have not yet heard him academically meet those scholars on their field and refute what they've said. All I've heard him is mock them. And I didn't actually pick a clip up, I meant to, of him mocking a very, very good takedown by Joel Corricto of his LSJ First agenda. And all Ammon could do was laugh about these, these Septuagint scholars, like, they've stopped teaching and now they're and he just sort of pretended to be sick. That's all he could do in response to an absolutely excellent takedown of his rather bananas agenda to make the LXX the original Greek, the original Hebrew Testament. So that's his team Eisegesis. And then we've got referees as well, the referee and the linesman.
Okay. Just for some clarity, though, yeah. So Dr. Joel Koretko on my channel, he comes on the channel. He's like, this is his field. This is expertise. Is the Greek Septuagint. All right. Did the Hebrew Bible or the Greek Septuagint come first? All right. And he presents all of these arguments held by all these different scholars in the world, and Ammon makes absolutely no attempt to address any of the points. Either he doesn't care or he's afraid or what, I don't know. But yeah, it's like why not just address the arguments? If you're so confident, you should be able to address the arguments pretty easily, right? But he didn't want to do that, clearly.
No, he only has two justifications for saying the LXX was first. One is an absolutely straw man argument that the Greek has, I remember, about 1.5 million of, if you took every single form, every part of participle of any verb or whatever, you got about 1.5 million words in Greek, but I think the root words, there's quite a few less, about 600,000-700,000. And that Hebrew is a different type of language and doesn't need that many words to make itself understood. So there's about 7,000 to 8,000 only. And because of the difference in the vocabulary size, Ammon somehow says that that means the Greek was written first. Pardon? You could take an ancient Sanskrit script, maybe, and translate it into Greek. Greek is far more complicated, but it doesn't mean that the Greek was written first, does it? It's just bananas. Yeah, there's absolutely no foundation to make that claim that proves that it was written first. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. All it gives is actually more vocabulary to choose the right word to accurately portray what the Hebrew was saying. And in theory, if the Hebrew hasn't got the technicality that the Greek has, you might have a very technical Greek word, it would mean you'd need a string of Hebrew words to try and unpack it. So you should have an awful lot more Hebrew words to meet every technical Greek word, to give it the right feeling. But no, it's virtually a word for word equivalent. If you do the word count, it's fairly equivalent. That's because the Greek has a big vocabulary to find the right one to meet the original Hebrew that's there. And there's so many other arguments, all the Hebraisms, the chiasms, the fact that the names in Hebrew only mean a phrase in Hebrew. They don't mean a phrase in Greek. You name it. There's so many other arguments. And plus the existence of Hebrew script, the Siloam script inscription, with Hezekiah. There was a presence of Hebrews in Israel in the 6th century. That's without doubt. But, Ammon somehow says that there wasn't any even religion. No Hebrews around, nothing happened until some immigrants from Cyprus came and they wanted to legitimize themselves and created a religion and created Yahweh in the 3rd century as well, apparently. It's crazy. Anyway.
It is wild.
Yeah. So the referee is truth, and he'll blow his whistle well and hard when there's a foul going on. And extra you can do is cross-referencing. Certainly with the Bible, it's very useful to have several accounts, so that if you've got an account and a word that's in an account in one gospel, you can see how the other gospels have explained it. All right, not there yet. Oh, yes, spoiling it. All right. Sorry. Okay. And of course, you've got the author's own style and vocabulary. I've already talked about that, really. And you can also have anachronism of theological thought, because Ammon will now start going in the Christian apocryphal texts, where he's trying to claim that these are actually written at the time that, Jesus is featured in them. So they happened with Jesus. But sometimes the theological thought that is there in it just doesn't fit for this very Jewish Jesus that was around at the time. It just doesn't fit. There's whole anachronisms everywhere.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is, like, just because one text has this one idea in it doesn't mean this entirely other text is talking about the same thing, even if it uses a similar word or phrase.
That's right. Yeah. So we have this football game. It's English football on a soccer pitch. But Ammon comes along to play American football, and he picks up the ball and barges all the English players out of the way, with the linesmen blowing their whistle, and putting their flags up, and the referee blowing whistles. And he charges through using his methodology and does a touchdown between the two goalposts and claims this is the translation. But he's violated everything on the way, and what he's ended up with is disallowed. It is not a goal. And I'll give you some examples later of how he's changed some words to make his agenda about Jesus fit. All right, but we'll get on to those. Now, can you go down, next one down? So we've got the single word, that's it. Right, I'm just wanting to illustrate a phenomenon, because I talked about it, but to actually see it in an example really helps. This phrase here, what would people think of it nowadays? What would you think of it? Yeah. So you might think, can we go to the 21st century one?
Is that the previous?
Yeah. All right. So Alan glared across the table, angrily propelling Barry's phone toward him, open at a convo with Julian. These were not training weekends and business trips, were they? You were having a gay affair. All right. So those words, pretty obvious what they mean. All right. But what happens here? 17th century. A carnival, a gay affair. We'll dance and revel till the dawn doth start to peep. But morning's lights will part us circumstance. We'll steal our joy and leave our hearts to weep. Totally different. And what Ammon would also do with a verse like this, he would pick up carnival, and that's from the Latin caro, and we get our word carnal from it. You see, this is actually talking about a Bacchic orgy, right here. You see, you've got the homosexual acts in this fleshly, and you have to have the revel and the dancing, and it's all part of the Bacchic revel, which you do at night. But in the morning's light, we have to go back away, and we'll steal our joy and leave our hearts to weep. All right. So that's the sort of thing that Ammon will do with the words that actually were taken from the contemporary text. You know, I know I've switched them around a bit, but it shows how both the semantics change with time and how context is so essential. And these are the two fundamentals that Ammon will very consistently ignore. And it's a big foul. And, you know, truth is blowing the whistle, but he carries on carrying the ball and barging the English players out of the way.
Right. And I think what's really important to mention is, okay, so like you can find multiple words in a text that has multiple meanings, and some of those words might have some type of, like, you know, meaning that, you know, sexual or whatever, like, for example, gay affair or carnival. It could possibly have that meaning, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has that meaning. So what we'll see from Ammon is that he'll take all these different words that could possibly mean something and just assumes, oh, that must be what it means. But like you have to give an argument for that. So like clearly there's no argument to be made here, even though you could say take these 2 or 3 words and be like, oh, you know, that must be what it's meaning. He's talking about a gay homosexuality and all this other stuff. But no, it's not meaning it here, and then we'll see that it's not meaning in other places.
Yeah. Right. This is about his muse. I was supposed to put a little I didn't put my header in there. This is from the deposition. I'm not going to read it all, but this is him explaining about his muse. She is the one that he says gives him his interpretations. As he's reading these texts, he says he's being guided. And he says he's duty bound to follow his muses. And one of them, he mentions, where are they? There's Cleo. Where's the other one? Can't even see it now. But he also mentions Bacchus, and he says, I am bound to follow Bacchus. And of course, this is the revel. All right. So he's almost bound to see things in this text which are related to the Bacchic mania and the Bacchic revel. All right. This is what he's looking for. Okay. We'll move on. Now, this is a correspondence that he had in 2012 with a young lady who is a poet, and they were at a cannabis culture conference where he spoke and where this lady also read a poem. And Ammon was apparently quite captivated by her. And in the end, he asked her, he went to the lounge and they both had a cut of cannabis together. Same amount, same batch. And Ammon was trying to persuade her to help him write a play. He wanted her to be the playwright. He had the idea. He knew that she had a sense of poetry about her. And to some extent, he was a bit insistent. She was a bit uncomfortable. But he said that apparently it was quite a strong cut of cannabis, and he was pretty far gone almost. And he said, look, I've got to get back to my hotel. I've forgotten the way. Could you walk me home, please? Which was his excuse to carry on talking with her. All right. Now, there's one or two little things here I want to pick out, which I've highlighted. He hallucinated all sorts of things there. I don't know if you can pick up some of these, maybe from the third paragraph down, certainly the fourth paragraph.
The green ones?
Yeah.
You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Sure. It says, then your hair got a purple stripe right in front of me and shortened, and you sound like some kick ass. Confident young woman. So at this point, you something were completely...
That's her name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were completely gone, and sitting in your place was a middle-aged woman from China. Actually, she was a bit aged, but still attractive. Then you made your hair blonde and started speaking with the voice of one of my former students that had a crush on me. When this happened, I got a little frustrated. If you noticed, and asked you to stop transforming. Do you recall me saying that? But then I realized I had asked Venus to send me a physical manifestation of the muse, and when I remembered that, I said out loud, "Oh, it's you, Venus. Thank you for the muse tonight." Then she smiled and sort of laughed and let me know that she was using you to show me something. That's for me, not you, and it was just between us, myself and Venus. And then your face became the most beautiful female I have ever seen, and you smiled at me and then transformed back into you, and then your voice changed back to your own, and you started talking to me again. So I guess she wasn't actually the most beautiful person he had ever seen. That's too sad. But yeah, so tell me, what is important about this to you?
Well, it's telling me what a strong effect just cannabis has on his mind and the hallucinations that he has. It was remarkable. And I messaged this lady, I'm in contact with her, and I asked her, did he take a lot more than you? Did he was taking other stuff? And she said, no, we shared the same amount. She had no effect, just felt quite comfortable and relaxed. And yet this is how it affected Ammon. He seems very, very susceptible to the effect of, I suppose it's a mild entheogen, but for him it was crazy. All right. So this is indicative of how drugs affect him. All right. Now we can move on to the next slide, please. And this is part of the deposition. Have you taken any recreational drug that might affect your ability to testify? I take marijuana, but not as a recreational drug. I smoke it as a sacrament and as part of my religion. So I don't consider it recreational. I don't smoke marijuana for the sake of recreation. So you don't consider marijuana a recreational drug? No, not in my case. In your case, it's considered what kind of drug? Sacramental, religious. Have you taken any sacramental drugs that might affect your ability to testify today? I've not taken anything that would prevent me from, that would change my testimony, no. And when did you last smoke marijuana? Monday morning. Okay, so it seemed pretty regular. He was having his marijuana. Okay, now can you do the first one up there, please?
The video?
Yeah, first video.
Nation or dealing with the real world in honest and grounded ways, even when claiming to be doing deep emotional work via powerful altered states. This type of spiritual bypass can also manifest as a psychedelic-fueled denial of science and insistence on supernatural or paranormal claims believed in by the kind of confident knowingness now described in neuroscience as the certainty bias, driven by the dopaminergic circuits activated when on drugs, being in love, love bombed by a cult, falling in love, or being indoctrinated into new beliefs. It wasn't until I found a legitimate therapist in his 50s with a lot of psychedelic experience and knowledge that I could begin the process of interpreting, integrating, and indeed recovering from how I used psychedelics as a form of escapist spiritual bypass and experience chasing, that my life actually did start to get better. And I started to deal with the real world in more grounded and, yes, eventually rational ways. Now, I know that under the right conditions and with the right guidance and correct dosage, psychedelics can be incredibly beneficial and helpful, but they have to be approached with respect and appropriate caution. They are rocket fuel for the mind, and under less careful conditions can indeed amplify and fan the flames of grandiose delusions, spiritual bypass, messianic grand narratives, and inflated dogmatic certainty, and self-importance. Interestingly, studies show that people who are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories have brains that tend to produce more dopamine. Think about the level of focused obsession with connecting the dots we see amongst conspiritualists. This is related to our capacity for pattern recognition, an ability that evolved because of its great survival value in terms of navigating the natural world. It helped us to see camouflaged predators or understand the behavior of our prey, predict basic weather patterns, and even make sense of the seasonal cycles. We saw patterns. As an aside, seeing patterns could also lead to, say, tearing the beating hearts out of virgin sacrifices atop pyramids as an offering to the sun god in exchange for good harvests and victory over our enemies. So, this skill can be overactive and see patterns that are not there. Rational people usually think of that type of pattern recognition as superstition, but give a rational skeptical atheist L-DOPA under laboratory conditions, and they will perceive patterns more frequently than they normally would, even when there's no pattern there. Because recognizing and learning from patterns is linked in a very ancient way to emotions and instincts around literally living or dying, there's a convincing shot of dopamine that we get when we believe we see an important pattern. And that strengthens pathways in turn associated with learning new information or skills. There can also be a potent, fearful resistance to believing we could be wrong about this new insight because of its connection historically to survival.
That's fascinating.
Yes, it is. And he did mention that when you're on a psychedelic or a psychotropic or an entheogen, you are releasing L-DOPA. All right. And everybody knows it. When you're reading something, you think, it's clicked. You get that rush. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You think that's a connection. All right. And I believe this is what's happening with Ammon. He's reading a text, but his mind also knows a Greek medical text that has that word, and he makes the connection. So for him, it's completely logical. I don't think it's anything malicious or deliberate, but the connection is made. And because there's that rush with it, it feels like the muse is telling him, this is what it means. All right. Now, that's a hypothetical. I may be wrong with that, but I've tried to puzzle through, what it is that drives him to be so certain about what the muse shows him, as if that's sacrosanct, it can't be touched. And I think those videos there might explain something of the drive and the certainty that he comes across with. He's absolutely convinced of what he's saying, and that comes through. And I think that's founded in this this experience he has when he's reading the text. He talks about the muse talking with him. And I think for him, it is very, very real, but is it the reality? Looking at the methodology, it's grabbing the ball and running with it and barging everything else out the way. It's not a methodology that is going to give you some valid results and actually score a goal. So we'll move on to next slide, please.
Something I did find interesting was that in that deposition, he seemed to say that if he was on marijuana at the time, that it might affect his answers or his ability to talk truthfully. But then he's also on other drugs or marijuana in other situations a lot and talks about it all the time. And I guess seems to think that it doesn't affect his scholarship in any way. I just find that fascinating.
I don't know if he's actually on other drugs. He knows medically what other drugs do. Certainly all the ancient herbal drugs. So I don't think he's taking anything else. I haven't heard any
other than marijuana, you mean?
No, I don't think so. It's what the ancient called asterion, and he often calls about the STR root. All right, and asterion, aster, star. It's the cannabis-shaped leaves. Yeah, the star. So that's one of the Orphic Vox words. All right. Now I didn't pick up the Orphic Vox in his own team. I jumped that one, unfortunately. But the Orphic Vox is actually very, very important to Ammon. But I don't think it applies. The Orphic Vox was discerned by a German scholar, Otto Kern. He did a lot of work on the fragments. There's, a lot of tiny little fragments of Orphic hymnology and other things that are bits of Orphic hymnology that have been quoted by other people. So he's trying to put together the theogonies and the cosmogonies and the anthropogonies of the Orphics from all these different, different fragments. And in them, there appear to be like drug terms as well, like asterion, the star, can mean cannabis, and ambrosia means something else, and this means opium, and so it was sort of like street names, all right, which were then woven into the Orphic fragments. This is what Otto Kern has suggested, and Ammon uses this technique. He used it in the Chemical Muse, and very effectively. I think there's a lot. It has a lot of mileage, certainly. In that type of literature, you're looking at mythology, you're looking at hymnology, worship of the gods, you're looking at a mythical past, and it's perfectly all right to use the Orphic Vox there. And I know that Ammon has tried to use, and I don't think legitimately, but it's as an academic exercise, you can look at the words in the Apocalypse, which is a visionary thing, and you could say it means other things, which obviously it does, but he has mapped into it from the Orphic Vox drug terms. You see, so the trochis, the seals on the scroll, it just means a round disc, all right? And it's a round disc of wax, and it's a seal. But a round disc can also be a medicinal pellet, like a suppository, actually, this one, and you break the seal by inserting it. So the 7 seals become 7 drugs because of the word trochis, all right? And that word trochis is also, as a wheel shape, it's used in Ezekiel with his vision of the wheels. So you've got Ezekiel on drugs, which allow you to see the visions. All right. You can see how it all connects. This is the thing. It seems to connect. But is it actually a foul or is it a goal?
Right.
All right. So this is the technique of the Orphic Vox. But to try and use the Orphic Vox on basically a quasi-historical gospel account that was written by several authors over 100 years, even that isn't reality. But then to try and put Orphic Vox reinterpretation and then call that the reality, it's far too far a stretch, which is this whole methodology that he's using. It's invalid in methodology, makes invalid results. Okay, so we'll move on and I'll give you some examples.
So where do we want to go here?
Yep. Oh, okay. Now this is related to the previous email that he gave to the lady. I'm also putting in here an excerpt from the memorandum in the court documents. This is the top one here. He said that this is Hillman talking to N.A., who's the actress, I think the one that played Medea. So he said that if his calculations were correct, N.A. would be the most sexually driven person on stage for opening. Hillman asked N.A. if she knew how beautiful she was. Another time, Hillman asked her if she was seeing anyone, and she admitted that she was talking with a guy. Hillman asked, "Who would dare to touch you? Who would dare to intervene on the space I have set aside for me?" N.A. remembers this word for word because it was the same time he tried to talk to the muse through her. Okay, same thing that he did in 2012 with his other lady. And as a result, I didn't explain actually, Hillman didn't have the lady's personal address, but because she was a speaker at the conference, he addressed the conference organizer, which is the first blanked out name. And he is responding on behalf of to Hillman. And he says, David, please do not contact me again. X and I are deeply disturbed by your behavior the night you coerced her to walk you back to your hotel. Apparently you told her that you didn't know the way and couldn't get there by yourself, when we both know you could have just hopped in a cab at any time. Neither of us want anything to do with you now or in the future. Do not reply, do not apologize. You've upset us enough already. And that's signed by the other person. Hillman had no idea of his actions. And the comment from the memorandum, the summary here, is, we are quite certain Hillman's claims against the institution represent a lack of his ownership of inappropriate actions. We take employee misconduct and sexual harassment claims very seriously. When claims against an employee are made at St. Mary's, they are investigated and acted upon. Alex Morey also published these quotes in his Fire article. That's another article I didn't quote here, attributing them to Stacia Vogel. Hillman says that they are false because his actions were not inappropriate and he did not commit sexual harassment. I don't think he's telling the truth there somehow. But I just wanted to highlight there's sort of like an insensitivity to his effects on other people, which is sad. I don't think he's deliberately hurting people. I think he's just unaware of it, and then he doesn't know how to make amends and make it right. So, that's just a bit worrying.
It is a text that shows you reaching up to my shelf to take a book, asking the muse, show me. It's not me, it's her. She found the most perfect text. It is a text that shows you Jesus was a pirate. I've been telling you Jesus was a pirate, a child trafficker. That's what I mean when I say pirate, right? A child sex trafficker. Jesus Christ was a child sex trafficker who used drugs in the process of creating trafficable children. And I told you that. And everybody looks at me and, and it's only because she showed me. Right? Well, guess what we've got tonight? Guess what she showed me again? We have a text. And in it, I'm going to show you. Right now, I'm going to show you Jesus Christ selling his apostles.
All right. I apologize for that. That was done at double speed. He's not that manic. I apologize. I had meant to re-record that one, but anyway. And the text that he's so delighted about is the Acts of Thomas, which he then claims is actually back down in the 1st century. It's a late 2nd century novel, really. Yep. It's their Marvel magazine. Yeah, it is not fact, but he teaches any text as if it's fact. So you have Thomas having his skin ripped off and walking around for 3 years and doing miracles with his ripped off skin. It's just crazy stuff. And yet he manages to spin it along as if this is completely true. And part of the story is that because the disciples, out of their devotion to Jesus, call him their master and them like his bond slaves, it means that the author then played on that and made Jesus sell his slaves and pass the ownership on and the care to somebody else, you see. So that proves he's a trafficker of children, you see. Thomas is still a child here, of course, he's only a youngster. So anyway, that's part of his invalid methodology, just using any text and calling it reality. It just beggars belief that it's taken seriously, but that's how it is. So anyway, the next one, please. But you see, he used it because the muse showed him. And if the muse showed him, it has to be true. This is the thing. This is the muse doing it for him.
Right. So if the muse is talking to him or reading or showing him whatever, then he has no reason to doubt it. He's not going to second guess it, right? Because it's the muse.
Yeah, that's right. You can't violate what the muse tells you.
Wow. Right.
So,
that explains so much.
Yeah. So carry on. We'll do the next one.
I take these gems from the muse. I take these gems from the muse. And a dude, she brought me Julius Africanus. He's an ancient dude. He's writing to Origen, very famous Christian. And what are they writing about? They're writing about this, exactly what I'm talking about. The Hebrew is a forgery. The original is Greek. That's not my idea. It's something right out of antiquity. And why is it even a concern at this time? Because this is when the forgery is taking place. This is when they're trying to pass off a false history. And who is doing it? Zealous monists, just like the followers of Akhenaten, just like the followers of Jesus.
Now, he quotes Africanus. This was done back in 2023 at some point. So I looked up Africanus and immediately it flagged up. Anyway, I'll read it to you. This at the time, no, all right, I'll explain it. He's talking, Africanus and Origen are having a discussion because, a bit of back history here. This is at the time when the Christians are wanting to isolate themselves from the Jews, because the Jews have had a big upset with the Romans, with the Bar Kokhba revolt, and the Christians want to be distinct from these Jews. They don't want to be under the same cloud, so they're doing their best to be their own separate people. Now, the Jews have their own Greek canon, which had been closed by then, so they had their own set of Greek texts, which they were using, and the Christians had their set of Greek texts, which they were using. And they were finding, there was a lot of arguments going between them, and Origen wanted to make sure that he could justify their selection of texts. Now, the Jews who know their own language immediately picked up an anomaly in the history of Susanna, which is one of the apocryphal books that's now in the Protestant Bible. Well, it was in the Catholic Bible, it is apocryphal now in the Protestant one, because it was fairly obviously not an original Hebrew. And this is what Africanus says to Origen, why they've got it, why the church has got it, but why the Jews missed it out. So this, at that time, as we meet, I accepted as genuine. This is Africanus talking to Origen, yeah. Now, however, I cannot understand how it escaped you that this part of the book, that's the book of Daniel, is spurious. For in truth, this section is plainly a more modern forgery. For not satisfied with rebuking them through the Spirit, he, that's Daniel, placed them apart and asked them severally where they saw her, Susanna, committing adultery. And when the one said, under a holm tree, which is a prenos, he answered that the angel would saw him asunder, which is presane. And in a similar fashion menaced the other, who said, under a mastix tree, skinos, with being rent asunder, skisthenai. Now in Greek, it happens that holm tree and saw asunder and rend and mastix tree sound alike, but in Hebrew, they are completely different. But all the books of the Old Testament have been translated from Hebrew into Greek. This is what Africanus said. There it is, black and white. What's the forgery? Only the history of Susanna, not the whole Hebrew Bible.
But he also plainly says that it was translated from Hebrew into Greek. So Ammon wants to say that Africanus was saying it's Greek to Hebrew.
Yep.
That's wild.
I know. But this is the connection he saw when he was under his influence and believed the muse showed him it. And he can't let the muse be wrong. So he has to maintain this, even though it's totally untrue. So he's dug himself a hole. Anything he says the muse gives him, he can't go back on.
Right.
He should question, did I miss it in the first place? Was that the muse talking to me, or was that me just making connections and feeling emotional about it? Because I was looking for that, and it seemed like it was right. So that's a question. I think he should question his methodology. I think everybody should question his methodology.
Well, I'm a big fan of everybody questioning everybody's methodology.
Yes,
But in this
question mine, please.
yeah, but in this specific instance, yeah, no, it seems pretty clear. Like, one, I want to hear the evidence for something, and two, like, just stating it, like, where's the text? And coincidentally, this is one of those times where Ammon never brings up the text of Africanus, and if he did, it would be pretty obvious.
Yeah. And you see, the thing is, even Neil Sendlak, the Gnostic informant, he has the integrity to say to Ammon, I disagree with you on this. And he's actually brought up the Africanus quote. And Neil has been doing it. And it caused quite a disturbance in the Mythanor Discord, actually. So Ammon had to do a show with Neil reassuring everybody, look, this was an academic disagreement on this one point. And he just minimized it down. But that's indicative of an awful lot more. All right. So, that's as far as you got. Right. Yeah. I won't go through all of these in great detail because many of them I've already got on my website, where I will go into meticulous detail about some of these. Some of them I really just haven't got as far as doing yet. I've been busy doing other stuff. I'm a slow worker as well. I'm too thorough. So reasons for contradiction is eisegesis of his agenda authorizes and proves his own fairy tale monster Jesus from the Koine Greek texts. All right. He's all the time saying, it's what the texts say. All I'm doing is bringing you the sources. Yeah. And this is what they say. No, it's how you interpret them to us is what they say. All right. It's very different. So he seems to whitewash everything he does because he's only reading the sources. No, you need the right method to read those sources and to translate them. And then it's valid. All right. Now, this top one, the leistes, is a major one. In the Koine, it is only meaning the robber, the sort of robber that mugged the guy on the Jericho road that Samaritan helped. All right. That's the word leistes. Or because most of the Gospels, in fact, all the Gospels are completed after Josephus had written his Antiquities and the Jewish Wars, he used the word leistes in a disparaging way to regard all the Jewish rebels that had risen up against Roman rule, the violent. The thing about leistes is there's the violence with it. All right. You've got the kleptes, which are the thief in the night. All right. And they're not violent. They're quiet. They're stealthy. But their leistes are like the pirates, like the Vikings, like the swashbucklers, like the muggers on the road, the highwaymen. They're the ones that do the daylight robbery. Okay. But they're also, because they're armed, because they're violent, they also could be a good term to call the rebels. Now, of course, Josephus was writing for the Roman emperors, even though himself had once been a rebel leader, right? He had to sort of be political and distance himself from his previous kinsmen and call them worthless outlaws, robbers, violent thugs, as rebels. But the word became associated with the Greek, with the Jewish rebels against the Greek rule. So you have in the classical Greek, leistes was also a connotation used for a pirate. And a pirate could steal all sorts of things, and they did. But some pirates, especially the ones from Thessaly, became renowned for stealing people. And they were the traffickers. All right. So in a very small section of classical literature, a leistes could refer to somebody who was a trafficker. All right. But in truth, I've done a good search for it. Aristophanes, in his play Plutus, uses the word andropedistes for trafficker, for slave dealer. It's also the word found in 1 Timothy 1:10. All right? And it's talking about actually the Gnostics, but that's my own research. But it's listing lots of horrendous sins. And one of them is to be a slave dealer stroke kidnapper. It's sort of, none of the modern translations have used our common word, trafficker. They were traffickers. Yeah. They've missed out on that one. But andropedistes is the word for trafficker in the Koine and in the classical. So if Jesus was being arrested for being a child sex trafficker, elestes, as Ammon has made it become, it shouldn't be called lestes. It should be, I'm, are you addressing me like an andropedistes? He doesn't say that. All right? It's the wrong semantic, and it's the wrong meaning. It can't mean even pirate, and it can't mean trafficker. But what it does mean, if you look at cross references, here you've got the linesman. What it does mean, if you look in John 18, verse 40, Barabbas is called elestes. But if you look in Mark 15, verse 7, Barabbas is called a soustasiestes, which is a co-conspirator. And in Matthew, I can't remember that one offhand, it says Barabbas took part in the uprising, the stasis. Okay. So we have very clearly identified Barabbas as a rebel. In fact, the one in Mark 15:7, it says the co-conspirators who had committed murder in the uprising. Okay. So you got very clearly an identification of Barabbas as a murderous rebel. He's also called elestes. And it's the equivalent word. He's trying to say elestes means a rebel. And Jesus is accused in Luke 23. It says that the Jewish leaders took him to Pilate and said, this man has been stirring up the people, telling them not to pay their taxes, and he's made himself a king. All right. Now, is that a rebel or not? Sounds like a rebel to me. And then later on, we went to Herod, and then he went back to Pilate. And Pilate then says, he calls them all together and says, look, I've interrogated him in front of you. And you came to me accusing him of inciting the people. All right, basically stirring up a rebellion. But I haven't found any cause to pin that on him. All right, so I'll just scourge him and let him go. All right, so we have very clearly the line, he was accused of being a rebel. And when the soldiers came to arrest him, they weren't even the Roman soldiers. If you read it, it's actually just the temple guard. All right, and the temple guard have still got the memory of only 20 years beforehand, 20, 25 years beforehand, of the rebel uprising that failed all around Galilee, and 2,000 people lost their lives and were crucified. And that was still raw in their memory. They didn't want another uprising like that. And Jesus was popular. He had huge crowds with him. They wanted to make sure that they were safe. All right. So, that's the reason they went for him. And it wasn't anything to do with him trafficking kids. It wasn't anything to do with him abusing them with drugs. And the young man, I was going to say the young man with him wasn't naked. He was wearing a cloth. It says, is it peribalo? I can't remember now. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wrapped around. It is to wrap around. All right. And I've gone into great detail in my website, looking at every word there, but I will get to them to some extent in a minute. So that's lestes. It just absolutely flat out cannot mean pirate, cannot mean sex trafficker, and has no connection to any cult activity. But Ammon has used it so often that as soon as you say lestes, you think trafficker. and he's even so confident with it, he's coined his own adjective, lastic. You know, this is a lastic operation. And people immediately think, oh, right, yes, he's using a pirate cult, trafficked child sex ritual here. That's what lastic means. You know, he has repeated. And I have to work hard to try and not have his voice in my head saying that when I'm thinking of it. All right, that's part of his methodology. Okay, so go back to that list. Right. Neoniskos there is actually a link. If you click on that, this is his translation of Mark 14, 51, 52. It's what has intrigued him. Just before it goes, it's what's intrigued him, what's become the mission of his life to understand Mark 14, 51 and 52. And it's led him into, you know, studying the ancient Scythian cultish rites, right through the medical texts to understand the sort of drugs that were the arrow poisons that the Scythian women used, the Amazonian women, through the drug texts, and, you know, right into Galen. He was actually given a task to help translate tomes of Galen, which haven't yet been translated. So he's been working on those. So his head is full of these amazing texts. And this is what he is seeing in Mark 14, 51, 52. So, and medical procedures as well. Okay. Now, one of the medical procedures, because they didn't have hypodermic needles, and if you ate something, often the metabolism would, you know, your own digestive system would break up the drug, and it wouldn't be effective. So in the end, most people had to either have it absorbed through the skin, so they'd have lacerations, or even just like a poultice kept on the skin so that it could be absorbed. Or sometimes it was a suppository or vaginally, or sometimes through the eyes, they would get drugs in. So they had all sorts of means of administering drugs. And it's fascinating, I'm sure. And Galen and Dioscordes talks about them. So we have that background before we then go into how he has translated these words.
Some unknown naked kid with his penis and testicles wrapped in a medicated bandage was assigned to serve Jesus. The authorities arrested the juvenile suspect, but he fled custody, and in the process, left his bandage behind. New Satanic version of Mark 14, 51, 52, right? Nice. Let me know. What do people think? Now, what I did with that, people, and I would love if a theologian would step in. I'd love if I could get some head of some Greek department at some seminary to step in. I'd love it. Look at the translation there. You cannot get a more elegantly modern literal translation of the Bible. I'm offering you tonight. And some unknown naked kid with his penis and testicles wrapped in a medicated bandage.
Yeah, you went round again. Okay, so I'm not a head of a theological college. I'm just a self-taught Greek student who knows how to use a lexicon and to think logically. And I think really anybody could do what I did. They just have to be calm, logical, and use the tools that are there and keep to a good methodology. And I've got it on my website and completely demolish it. Anyway, I hope other people might look through it, and if they've got objections to tell me. But the Neoniskos there, he's made into a pre-pubertal kid because that's part of one of the mystery rites. And because he wants Jesus to be doing the mystery rite, everything has to then fit into it. All right. So he hasn't actually made up his mind whether or not this medicated bandage wrapped around his penis and testicles is doing a castration, or whether it's producing the death inducer, or whether it's producing the antidote. I've heard all three in the past. So the muse is either very confused, or he's not hearing it right, or he hasn't made up his mind yet what it's meant to be. So yeah, it morphs. So we have Now, it is quite ridiculous. He's used the word gumnos twice in the same sentence. You've got epigumnu, all right, which is upon. Now, gumnos there, or epigumnu, it's been used as a nominative, a nominating adjective, all right? So it's naked body, upon his naked body, all right? So it's not said, but it's implied, it's there. So you have, he's used gumnos once to describe the kid as being naked, a naked kid. And then he's used the same gumnos, as in epigumnu, again, to then suddenly become his penis and testicles. It's never, ever, it's not prescribed anywhere. Never is gumnos, ever, penis and testicles. And he knows there's at least 4 other words which could be used. You've got eidoion. You've got spelion, which actually is really the grotto, that the den of thieves, but it's used in Habakkuk 2:15 about getting your neighbor drunk and then looking on his spelion, on his nakedness. So there's spelion, and he even brings that one up himself. You've got orchis, which really it's the gonads, so that's your testicles. And you've got the peribelion, which is really it's the scrotum. It's the wrap around the sac. All right. So, you've got your testicle sac there. So, there's plenty of other Greek words that should be there. And how he's used syndon, which is simply the cloth. Syndon is always just a plain piece of cloth. And if you're going to make it into a bandage, you've got to describe it in strips. And it's telemon or telemon are the strips. All right. And if it's medicated, then you've got to describe what it's medicated with. And I've got all on my website there, plenty of examples of what could have been written there if that is what the meaning was meant to be. And it's not. It's just epigumnu is upon his naked body. And yet he's made that upon his penis and testicles and used it again as naked. It's just bad translation. I'm sorry, Ammon. I don't think any Greek scholar could agree with you at all. And I don't know, everything. I've made a good look at it all. I'm not going through it all now, but please look at my website. I'll give you the link for that. Now, Creo is another major one. When he started off, Creo he understood, and Christos as anointed one. He understood them, and he talked about them. He even said anointed one. But again, the muse seems to have changed her mind, and Christos now can only mean a drug term, and Creo can only mean applying drugs. All right, and they are always drug terms now. Okay, so they've gone through a metamorphosis. Okay, you better change your Bibles now. All right, so it is nothing, and that how he manages to read the texts, instead of saying drugs can be drunk, or they can be eaten, or they can be smeared, applied. Yeah. He will say they can be drunk, they can be eaten, or they can be Christed. All right. So he's made the word smearing become Christ. So when you hear Jesus Christ, you think of Jesus the drug. Yeah. And when he was supposedly commissioned by Satan to bring in the Antichrist, that he has now become a code word for bringing the antidote, because the Christ is the drug, the dote, and the Antichrist is the antidote. So it's been a clever little twisting of words, but it's invalid. Creo does mean to anoint or smear in any text. It is not a drug-specific thing. And he even says that because in Revelation 3:18, Jesus says, I counsel from you to buy from me gold, etc. I counsel from you to buy eye salve, that you may creo your eyes. All right. So this creo means to anoint your eyes so that you may see. All right. So it's a special drug. It's the purple. All right. Which is why you've got all these pictures of Jesus with this purple running down his face. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got this purple because they're putting purple in their eyes. That's what they say. And they've taken it literally. That's a metaphorical thing. It's figurative language. Yet he's made it into a literal. Jesus has commanded you to anoint your eyes so that you can see. And you've got to use the purple drug. It's not being very, it's just not using the text and understanding them and using them with integrity. So that's another one. Penthera, mother-in-law. It only means mother-in-law. There's no other meaning for penthera. And this comes up because he's trying to prove that all the apostles are more children to help supply the drugs for Jesus, because children's bodies become the drug factories. You apply things anally and stimulate them enough, they'll ejaculate, and you've got your antidote. That's the idea. Charming. But that's how he says that he's using his children, who is his disciples. All right. And if Peter goes and heals his mother-in-law, you can't have Peter being married. So mother-in-law becomes any female relative. It could be his aunt. It could be his sister, his elder brother's wife, his sister-in-law. He has to change things so they will fit his agenda. Penthera means mother-in-law. Peter was married. Look at the text. He owned a boat. He was told to go and catch a fish and take the coin out to pay his tax. You have Matthew sitting at the booth in Mark, I think. And because he's sitting at the booth, he's sitting there with his dad, who was doing the tax collecting, right? But when you read it, the parallel, you look at the cross-references in Matthew or in John, I can't remember which one it is now. One of them, he says, he saw a man sitting at the tax collector's office. And another one, the other gospel says, he saw the tax collector, Levi. The cross-references confirm each other. And then Levi takes them to his house and throws a party, a huge party, for all of Ammon's, Jesus's followers and all his tax collector friends. This isn't a kid. This is an adult. You've got, James and John with their dad, of course, in the boat. These are the kids just helping their dad out. No, they are partners with Peter and his, Peter and Andrew. They're independent men running a business. You name it. The arguments just weigh against them. And he says that Jesus is always calling them children. Yeah, techno. It's a word that you can use, a teacher to his disciples. Mm-hmm. All right. And mathetes. And mathetes does not mean he's a school-age kid, because all of the people listening to Ammon are his students as well. He is their teacher. And because they're his mathetes, does that make them children? No, they're adults. And I heard him saying, kiddies, kiddies, talking to his own listeners. He knows the terminology. It's an affection. And yet when he sees it in the Bible, it means he's talking to literal children. It's such a convenient swap around just to make it fit. All right. So what's next in the list?
What's next? It's an unending.
Oh, we've got homotelos, which is just sinful. Peter falls at his, after he calms the storm, and he falls at his knees. No, it wasn't. It was the miraculous catch of fish, wasn't it? And he says, "Oh, get away from me. I'm a sinful man." Yeah, just awed at this miraculous, amazing person that did the miracle of the fish there. And he takes homotelos, looks at the LSJ, and way down the bottom is a mention about a prostitute being a homotelos. Therefore, and he does a long, long rabbit trail, homotelos means a male prostitute. You did know that, didn't you? Yeah, that's the meaning of homotelos. So, yeah, which proves that all the rest of them are also prostituted by Jesus. And they were also pandered out on the boats. This is where you can do your clientele in secret, you see. You take them out to the middle of the Lake of Galilee and another fishing boat will come up. You can do your transaction there. And I've heard him talking about pandering out his kids from the boats on Galilee. They weren't fishing. No, they were just doing their business. So, yeah, that's another one. Now, this hapto, I've actually got a video for that one. I didn't link it there. I think it's in a later one. But Carl Ruck is the only philologist that, Professor Carl Ruck is in his late 80s by now, still teaching at Boston. Amazing man. He plays Liszt on the piano, got a grand piano, and just, I don't know if he still does it every day, but, just at the age of 80, 88 or so, maybe 90 now. And, his philology is incredible. And he's about the only person that Ammon will look up to. And he claims authority from Carl, because this is right at the end of the Danny Jones interview. And he asks him, are there anybody else that can confirm your translations? So he appeals to Carl. But actually, if you listen to him, he's actually honest there. He says, well, he approved of my translation of the Apocalypse. And this is just an academic exercise he did, taking the Orphic Vox and asked Carl, if you're going to use the Orphic Vox on the Apocalypse, would this be how it could be translated? So you got the trochis being the drugs and whatever else. So, and Carl agreed, yes, you've done pretty well there. All right. And that's the only thing actually that Carl endorses, because Gnostic Informant did one on the mysteries. This is back in August, I think, 2022. And he was originally just going to be interviewing Carl, and his phone kept going. So he said, look, sorry. Oh, okay. All right. I'll let you in. And Ammon jumped in on that stream. It was meant to be him and, Gnostic and Carl, but Ammon jumps in and wants to. He's very, very deferential in his talking to Carl. He sees a lot of respect there from Ammon towards Carl. And you can see that Ammon is trying to test how he feels about certain aspects that he has imagined into the text. And actually, Carl doesn't agree with a single one of them. And the hapto is, it has got a connotation of molest. You've got 1 Corinthians 7. Is it right for a man to touch a woman? Okay. Now, this is not normal sexual relations. You're looking at illicit sexual relations. Yeah. Unwanted, unsolicited, molesting. Okay. And that, if you look in the LSJ, that's about the only reference in about, I can't remember, it's about 48 different connotations or different places where hapto is used. And this is the one where it's got that connotation of being, unsolicited touching. All right. And when Ammon retells that story, anybody familiar with it knows that the parents brought the children to Jesus for him to touch. And it was the disciples who said, stop bringing them, don't bother the teacher.
Right.
You know, he doesn't think much of your little kids. And Jesus tells them off and he says, look, come here, bring a little kid here. Such are these of the kingdom of heaven. And that's the lesson. All right. But when Ammon retells it, he says, the parents were telling the disciples to get Jesus to stop molesting their kids. Completely, everything totally upside down.
Yep.
Yeah. And he says that again and again. It's not a mistake. You see, when I first heard him say that in Gnostic, I thought, okay, he's just misremembered. He's just muddled his words. And when I first reached out to him, I was a bit bold. I wrote out an explanation of some of my research, which I knew would tick his boxes, and it certainly did, about, because I was seeing the semen communion, I was seeing the libertine, the manic, the entheogens, everything that he was seeing, I was seeing those too. So, he thought, hey, I've got a great ally here. But I was saying they were being opposed by the church, whereas his interpretation is that this was the church, and that later translators and interpreters obscured it. Right? So he's got his own conspiracy theory now that somehow all these gospel writers knew that if they wrote this word, you've got to try and hide the real reality, and pack it around, so that people think that you're talking about something else. Well, actually, you're really talking about this hidden mystery that only somebody in the 21st century is going to understand and tell you about. So, that's his conspiracy. So in the end, you've got just totally upside down. And I actually dared say, if you look at the one under that, it's my email, my very first email to, can you get that one up? Next one up. Here is my first email to him. And I said, P.S. I hope you don't mind me pointing out something that discredits what you're saying. I've also noticed you may be over-interpreting and slipping into confirmation bias here and there because you're not careful enough checking the NT passages you quote. I've noticed you repeat this several times now, and you're not being very accurate about Jesus touching the children. Yes, hapto can be used for molest, but it really means to touch in such a way that it creates a change in the thing touched. It's the root of the same word used when Jesus touches blind men's eyes, to heal them. And remember that laughter revival in the mid-90s? That's as much hapto as was going on, I believe. And it was not the parents who were worried. They were bringing their kids to Jesus to hapto them. It was his hard-hearted disciples that wanted the parents to stop bothering their master because they didn't value the little kids like Jesus did. Check it out yourself, Ammon, in Mark 10, 13, 15, and I've actually quoted it for him. And they were bringing children to him that he might touch, hapto them, and the disciples rebuked them. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, let the children come to me, do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. And he took them in his arms and blessed them, laying his hands on them. That's your touching, okay? Parallel passage in Mark 19. Then children were brought to him that he might lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people, but Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, etc. All right. He also talks about the use of an alabastron, which can be a medical applicator. And the original alabastrons were probably medical applicators because of the shape. They were very long and thin, and they had a narrow neck, and the drug was inside, and there was a seal, a wax seal, and you had to break the seal. So when it says that Mary broke the box, she's actually breaking the seal to get the perfume out. But they became perfume containers, so she brought the nard, the spikenard, and it was a fragrant oil. And she poured it on his head, or she, there's various descriptions, but none of them are, she rubbed it on the outside and then upped his, there is nothing about that. But of course, because she wiped his feet with her hair, then it becomes the, well, feet is another word that some people say can be used for another part of the body, you see. So it becomes a sexual thing. And he says that Pope Gregory forgave Mary for using sex drugs on Jesus. He says that frequently, and that's just, again, total rubbish, because it's homily 19, and Pope Gregory is saying that Mary Magdalene, with her 7 sins, her 7 demons, are just representative of the 7 deadly sins, basically all of human sinfulness, and Jesus forgave her. And it's just an allegory, all right? But Ammon's already believed in his own mind that she had used this sex drug on Jesus and given him priapism, so that when he was on the cross, it was erect, and it was just totally shameful and all sorts of imagination. And Pope Gregory was just writing to priests to say, don't be offended by any sin that comes to you. Jesus forgave them. You also forgive them. That's what the homily was about, and there was no specific, this is Ammon's imagination for you. So there you are. Mary Magdalene, she was the Marga. She was the sort of the sorceress, basically. She was the senior magician amongst them, apparently, Mary Magdalene, because the 16th century philologist said that Marga was from the Scythian word meaning whatever. So, all right. So really, that's finished now. And actually, I will say my motivation to point this out is because I'm jealous for you to not let detractors find valid criticisms, okay? But please be encouraged to carry on your invaluable service to seekers like myself after the actual truth of why Christianity started, what was going on in the first century religious scene, and what was actually getting Paul's knickers in a twist. But also, please be careful about your fact-checking. All right? So I know what I'm talking about. He reads that as if I'm saying, I am agreeing with you with what you're saying about, that Jesus was doing. But, he found out later that I wasn't going to move my position. Yeah. So he still responded very, very positively to that. We Zoomed immediately and seemed to hit it off okay. But then, and I was Lady Rowan when I first joined the Discord. I was honored. I was put in a chat group with Armand Snappy, the person that made that appeared that made some commentary there. I was sort of put straight in with the senior people, but I was never really part of it. It's just that I appeared to be right in tune with what he was doing at the time. That was just my own research, but from a different angle. So I think probably that's about as much as I really need to say. I've been on about it long enough, 2 hours 20. So
Jesus, he said, I am. And it says they went around to his back. They circled him. They went around him so he couldn't get away. And epesan hamai, they fell on him. They attacked. The Greek uses this for falling all the time. All the time. One enemy falls upon another. So they surround him and they take him. They start to arrest him. They grab him, right? And as they're going for him, Jesus says,
all right, good stop there. Wow. 3 words he completely reinterprets, because his agenda is to make Jesus into a criminal. So he needs to have the soldiers surrounding him and pouncing on him to grab him because he's a cowardly criminal. All right. This is the passage in John where Jesus says, they said, who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth, are you him? And he says, I am. And you're supposed to have this power going out and knocking them all on their backs. Okay. So we are familiar enough with the actual words, but he wants to change the adverb backwards into the noun, his back, They went round to his back instead of Orpizo, which is just backwards. All right. And they fell on him. No, I won't go through it all now, but I searched hard and I found an excellent one in the Iliad, which almost uses exactly the same words. The text reads, "So he fell upon him, but the corpse fell from his hand." So I found phrases here in classical Greek that if he wanted to, if the biblical author wanted to actually say how Ammon is interpreting it, he would use these words. But no, it is literally, they fell, they went backwards and fell to the ground. And to the ground, chamai, he makes into on him. They fell on him. That's auto. It's total eisegesis. It is not translating. He is creating a narrative and forcing it into the text. I think anybody can actually see that if they actually look at the words. He's not being a faithful translator. He's not being truthful in his dissertation, in his deposition, or relating his deposition. He has to be truthful in the deposition, but relating it, he's not being truthful. He's not being truthful about, it's just the whole persona that he's making. It's just not credible. And his translations, I've not even shown you all of them. And I say, I'm not a Greek philologist of any standing. I just use logic and the dictionaries. And the Perseus Tufts website is brilliant. Anybody can do what I've done and show that this is not a valid translation. And you don't need to know all these other obscure Greek texts to try and prove that I'm at the same level as you, so therefore I can joust with you fairly. I might just be a little David slinging a stone, but I can still knock that Goliath down. It's a matter of methodology, not the type of Greek medical text that you've read. All right. And if you just are careful and rigorous with your hermeneutics, it just shows up all the flaws. Okay. So that's my offering. And I hope that people in the Myth and Law Discord who are still connected with Ammon, actually, this is an interesting bit of story. I'll let you have. This is being recorded on the Sunday after I first gave an interview with Jevin. And we said quite a bit more about the cult dynamics that were going on in that interview. And the following week, there was upheaval in the Discord. We found a lot of people really questioning. Ammon and Gnostic Informant have left the Discord. We don't know where they've gone, and they took all their Greek resources with them. The moderators in the Discord have been very upright, I think, and known that in the past they've had a beautifully eclectic, well-functioning community of looking into, mystical things, Greek goddesses, other religious paths that Myth and Law has always been part of. Ammon came in and brought a lot of disruption and actually took over the Myth and Law. He had his own private server that he went to, so he's got the concentrated effort there. But I also know that the person who made that private server eventually himself wanted to go. And he had the keys, so he locked their private server. And this happened after my very first interview with Jason Horsey, which is about a month ago now. So they must have opened another server. They're using something else now. But after the exit on Tuesday of the Ammon and Gnostic and the Greek resources. The co-host of Drawing Down the Stars with Snappy, this is Dion, he posted a cult recovery resources for everybody to see. And I thought, that's good. So what we brought on Sunday, I hope, has helped people actually realize some of the dysfunction that had been going on. And I hope that what I brought now will continue to open people's eyes. I don't have any malice for anybody. I know some of them have been pretty rotten to me in the past, but you're just being manipulated. I've got nothing against any of you. I just want reconciliation. I just want truth. I just want friendship. And I want people to be free. It had been quite harrowing for myself and Chris when we first left. We hadn't realized how much toxicity we had absorbed, and it took us a while to heal. But it's given me insight. It's given me compassion. It's part of what's driven me to stay with this and to actually try and keep blowing the whistle and waving the flags, and to persist. I hate how people can get manipulated. And I just want the people to have the opportunity to have another look, have another careful look, and then make up your own mind. Do you want to stay or do you want to be free? So I shall leave that with everybody now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking about that and being open. I hate that you had to go through all those difficult experiences, but we also really appreciate that you were going to come on here and help us understand the topic more, tell us more about your experiences as well as your studies on this very topic and Ammon's work, and we do appreciate that. So for those watching, if you are wanting to learn more about the cultic activities, you can check out the link in the description where I talked with Ali and Jevin on that very topic of cultic activities that were going on there and hazing. And you can also check out Ali's channel in this, or not her channel, but her website in the description, and on a number of videos that we've done on the topic of Ammon Hillman. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming on here.
Okay. Oh, and I will add that we will put the links to the original court documents so that you can look through them yourself. And there'll also be pointers of which documents are the most important ones. Some of them are just affidavits and, various motions, but the most important ones we'll highlight for you so that you can read through them yourself, and see a bit more of his character and a bit more of his history, and just see for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ali.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. I've appreciated the opportunity to say my story.
You as well.
Okay.